Chapter 24, The Battle of Azkaban, Ron. Hermione cried, racing right behind Harry. Ron shouted in recognition, and in an instant, the three of them collided in a tight embrace. Tears stung Hermione's eyes as she clung to her two best friends. Behind them, the Order was already sealing the door once more, as Kingsley had guided them through the secret apparition point and they fought their way through the ground floor of Azkaban. Hermione had been gripped by terror at the thought of arriving only to find the revolt crushed, Ron dead, or worse, kissed by the Dementors. When they finally pulled apart, Ron's gaunt face broke into a wide grin. "Is that you, Harry?" he asked, recognizing his friend, who was, as usual, under the effects of Polyjuice potion. "About time you two showed up." Ron's gaze landed on an approaching Draco, also under Polyjuice, appearing as a mousy-haired man in his mid-20s. The halls of Azkaban had taken a heavy toll on him. He looked pale, his forehead glistening with sweat. "Weasley," he said, attempting to replicate his usual drawl. Recognition flickered in Ron's eyes. "Malfoy, can't Polyjuice your way out of the way you talk?" "Apparently not," Draco replied. After a brief pause, he and Ron exchanged a quick handshake. Hermione shared a relieved glance with Harry. There was no room for grudges here. Determining the situation within Azkaban had proven challenging. As they navigated the dark, damp corridors, they had fought off groups of Dementors and clashed with two clusters of Ministry workers, but it seemed the majority of the Azkaban guards had pursued the Ministry to the upper floors. The screams echoing down the stairwells had sent chills through Hermione's veins. Kingsley, having visited the prison numerous times, knew exactly where to find the nearest entrance to the yard. With Professor McGonagall's help and transfiguration, they had managed to uncover the concealed door. Now, those wounded in their push through the prison halls were being. Luna had taken a hex to her side, leaving a burn that resembled a third-degree injury, while Fleur lay sprawled on the gravel, with Bill and Kingsley tending to a deep gash on her arm. Yet, amidst the chaos, reunions were unfolding all around them. Ron and Harry joined a large cluster of Weasleys, and Lee Jordan had tackled a gaunt Oliver Wood and Angelina Johnson. Lupin was embracing a very pregnant Tonks, who stood beside a man Hermione assumed was her father. Despite the Order's summer meetings, Hermione had never met him in person. She studied Ted's kind face until she noticed his eyes suddenly widen. Following his gaze, Hermione spotted a figure emerging from the crowd of prisoners, drawn in by the commotion. For a terrifying moment, she thought it was Bellatrix Lestrange, the dark hair, the haughty, high-boned features, but no, this woman had a softer, kinder face, a mouth that hadn't spent years twisted in disgust. "Is that?" Hermione whispered to Draco, who had stiffened beside her. "My aunt," he replied slowly. "Andromeda." Now, Lupin, Tonks, Ted, and Andromeda were huddled together. "How long have you been here?" Ted asked, his voice choked with emotion, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Months. They found me just after we were separated," Andromeda said, her eyes bright but dry. Hermione turned to Draco. "You've never met her, have you?" "No. I've only seen her in one or two family photos, the ones that weren't," his lips pressed together, fixed. "She looks like you," Hermione noted. Draco didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on his aunt, uncle, and cousin. It struck Hermione then how similar their circumstances were to those of Tonks's parents. Tonks had shared with Hermione that Andromeda had been disowned before she turned 20, right on the brink of the First Wizarding War. In marrying Ted, she had been left penniless and friendless. Adrift, it was the same fate that awaited Draco when they finally admitted what they meant to each other. Yet, as Hermione watched Ted embrace Andromeda, warmth spread through her, and she found herself thinking, "I would be there for Draco the same way, just like that." Clearing her throat, Hermione turned to Draco. "That reminds me, here." She gently nudged him to rejoin Harry and Ron, who had just finished hugging his siblings. "Ron," she asked, "have you seen Pansy Parkinson and her parents? Are they all right?" For some reason, Ron's cheeks flushed with color. "Yeah, that way." He pointed. Draco and Hermione turned, and through the crowd, Hermione caught a glimpse of a ghostly, bedraggled pansy standing next to her parents, their faces still familiar from the polyjuice potion. Draco let out a short breath of relief. Just then, two other prisoners jogged up to Ron. Weasley, panted the taller of the two, who had copper skin and an ash wand in hand. I've calculated the arithmetic depth alignment. Perfect, Suresh, Ron replied, sounding surprisingly knowledgeable. Hermione blinked in disbelief. Why did Ron know anything about arithmetic depth alignment? Professor Vector had only mentioned it briefly in their 6th year. She exchanged bewildered glances with Harry and Draco, but before they could voice their confusion, Ron lifted the deluminator high and called out, "Everyone, gather round, as fast as you can." The order formed a rough circle, and Hermione's chest tightened at the sight of so many of them standing shoulder to shoulder, backed by hundreds. "We know we can't get everyone back to the apparition point," Ron explained. "So, we're going to hit the apparition wards themselves. This is Suresh Mudun. He's discovered how deep the, what's it called, mate?" "Ward anchor," Suresh replied, "right. How deep the ward anchor is buried." "What's a ward anchor?" Dean asked. Hermione answered before she could stop herself. "A ward anchor," she began, "a magical lodestone inscribed with ancient runes," Suresh explained. "It casts a protective enchantment over a designated area." He nodded approvingly, "Yes. As for the anchor, my diagnostic charms indicate it submerged within the island at a depth of 6.6 to 6.8 meters. Fred's expression turned to dismay as he scanned the yard. "What? You mean the anchor could be buried anywhere on this island?" "That's the thing," Ron interjected. "I don't think so. They say Azkaban is resistant to flying, tunneling, swimming, and every other means of escape, right? So, outside the prison walls, the entire island must be warded against digging or blasting charms. They wouldn't want anyone trying to break a prisoner out from the outside. That means if the surface of the island has no weaknesses or access points. They must have buried the anchor inside the prison," Bill concluded, nodding in agreement. "Exactly." Ron surveyed the yard critically. "It could be here, but I suspect we'll find it in a basement or some other location we can only access through the building itself. Extra protection. You see? Well, if we're going to search," Lupin began, but before he could finish, a series of shrieks echoed throughout the yard, cutting him off. The order looked up as one, and Hermione's heart sank. Hovering ominously above the battlements was the eerie green glow of a massive dark mark. Draco made a sudden, convulsive motion beside her. Hermione yearned to take his hand but held back. They had kept their feelings hidden from the order for so long. Even now, she reminded herself that word could not get back to the Malfoys. "That'll be Lestrange and the others," Kingsley said grimly. "Well, I can't say we didn't expect it. Minerva, Remus, and I cast some powerful spells on the front entrance. But that won't hold the Death Eaters back for long. Then we need to get in there and find that anchor now," Ron urged. Tonks tensed, ready for the fight, her hair shifting back to her favorite bubblegum pink. "But Ron, that deluminator needs to stay out here, otherwise, this lot doesn't stand a chance. What do you think, Dirk?" A lean, hard-faced man with dark, flyaway hair spoke up from Ron's other side. "She's right, Weasley. We need some strong spellcasters in Transfiguration to conjure a physical barrier between this yard and those battlements." Dirk pointed upward. "We've been relying on the Dementors to keep the Ministry at bay, but with more reinforcements coming in. Well, your deluminator is good, but it can't stop Death Eaters from shooting killing curses down at these people." Professor McGonagall's sharp gaze swept from one prison wall to the other. "To cover an area of this size, we'll need at least a dozen conjurers." "Ooh, this will help, then," said Luna, gingerly unslinging a bag from her back. Careful of her burn, Ron looked skeptical, but his expression brightened when she revealed a handful of wands. He eagerly took the bag from her. "Luna, we're in Merlin's name, they're from Ollivander," Luna replied cheerfully. "He's made quite a few over the past month and a half." Once everyone in the order was armed, Ron handed the remaining wands to Dirk. Dirk, Ted, and Sturgis, Pass these out to the prisoners with strong transfiguration backgrounds or who are trained fighters. I know this crowd has both. Ron scanned the circle and then handed the deluminator to Dean Thomas. You take this, Dean. It's up to you to keep the Dementors off everyone, all right? As for the rest of us, we'll search the ground floor for the anchor. Mrs. Weasley opened her mouth as if to protest, but Dirk and the others were already following Ron's orders. She stood there, momentarily speechless, surprised to see her youngest son commanding men twice his age. Blimey, George muttered, exchanging a startled glance with Fred. Ickle Ronnikins isn't so ickle anymore. They were right. For the first time, Hermione noticed how tall Ron stood, with everyone in the circle looking to him for direction. She couldn't recall seeing him so confident since their first year, when they had navigated the giant chessboard, Ron guiding Harry and her to safety. Draco must have noticed, too, as he leaned toward Hermione and murmured, "What exactly happened to Weasley in here?" "I have no idea," she whispered back, smiling. Soon, the prison yard was dotted with wands held aloft. Under Professor McGonagall's direction, streams of spells shot overhead, forming a stone barrier between the yard and the battlements. Dean held the deluminator high, its light blending with the eerie green waves pulsing down from the dark mark. While Lee and Ginny rallied the crowd to search the yard for a hidden trapdoor. The rest of the order gathered around the entrance to the prison. Hermione's pulse quickened, her hand growing sweaty around her wand. "Shall we split up to search, Ron?" Harry asked. Ron nodded. "Good idea, let's break into 2 groups. If there are too few of us, the Dementors will have an easier time, but if we have too many people running around, we won't have enough space to escape if we're attacked." Together, Ron and Kingsley organized the order. Within moments, Kingsley was leading the second group toward another exit door. Their own group formed ranks. Hermione felt reassured with Lupin, Tonks, and Augusta Longbottom at the front. Tonks had transformed her stature, now well over 6 feet, to help counteract the effects of her pregnancy on her stride and fighting speed. Meanwhile, Neville's grandmother gripped her wand like a knife. Harry, Ron, and Draco stood by Hermione's side. Bringing up the rear were Ted and Andromeda, Oliver Wood, and Dirk Cresswell, another skilled fighter whose confident stance eased the tension in Hermione's chest. Hermione felt her nerves begin to settle. "Ready?" Ron called out, his voice cutting through the tension between the 2 groups. 1, 2. Go! The doors swung open with a bang, and the order rushed back inside the prison. Their first move was to barricade the door to the yard behind them, expertly transfiguring it to resemble an ordinary wall, rendering it unremarkable to any ministry members who might come looking. As the light from the deluminator faded, Hermione immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The temperature dropped sharply, sending a chill through her bones. Anxiety tightened her stomach once again, twisting it into knots of dread. But the 9 patron muses swirling around them provided a comforting glow. She raised her wand, and her otter danced playfully around her feet and Draco's, casting light into the shadowy corridor of the prison. "All right?" she asked Draco. He nodded, though his expression was strained. He hadn't managed to conjure a Patronus, only wisps of silver vapor. He stepped closer to her otter, seemingly finding solace in its presence. The corridor felt unnervingly silent. In the distance, echoes of cries, moans, and even explosions reverberated through the maze-like halls. It was clear that the protection surrounding the outer walls didn't extend to those inside. "Which way, Ron?" Lupin asked in a hushed voice. Ron peered down the long, narrow passage. "We should start by checking the entrance, where they put us in uniforms. There's a sort of cellar room there." "That's very risky," Augusta Longbottom interjected, her voice sharp and calculating. "The Death Eaters could break through the front door's enchantments at any moment, Weasley. They may have already done so." A dull boom echoed overhead, causing the order to flinch and glance up at the ceiling. "Then we'd better hurry," Oliver Wood urged, his sandy hair appearing dark gray in the dim light. "Wait," Hermione exclaimed, a sudden realization washing over her. "Hold on, I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier." She rummaged through her robes, finally pulling out the magical compass from her pocket, which, They had been directed to the Elder Wand what felt like ages ago, though in reality, it had only been a few hours. This compass will point to the most magically saturated item in the area, which must be the ward anchor, right? Those anchors undergo months of enchantments and potion submersion every year. And this one has been around for centuries. Won't there be interference from the Deluminator? Harry interjected. Or from, Draco hesitated, his hand drifting toward his robes, but he, Harry, and Hermione exchanged a knowing glance. Before the Order had left headquarters, Draco had snatched Hermione's beaded bag and stowed the destroyed Horcruxes along with the Elder Wand, just in case something went awry and the Potter cottage was compromised. No time to waste, Tonks urged impatiently. Give it a try, Hermione. Hermione tapped the compass and declared, Locarium Revelio. The needle whirled in response. At first, her heart sank as it pointed back toward the yard, seemingly confirming Harry's concerns. But then it swung around again, oscillating like a pendulum between two alluring points, the yard and a location to the northwest. That way. Hermione exclaimed. It's that. In an instant, chaos erupted. The leftmost fringe of the group shouted, brandishing their wands and sending their patron muses soaring toward a dark, churning mass of Dementors. A chilling wave swept over them, and Hermione staggered back, gasping as the icy grip pierced her to the core. Simultaneously, a group of ministry workers burst into view at the opposite end of the hall. Wands shot up in unison, and spells flew toward the Order with such speed and intensity that Hermione barely had time to scream. Protego! This way! Ron shouted, urging them into the stairwell. They surged forward, climbing upward in a frantic rush. The most experienced fighters instinctively positioned themselves at the rear, battling to fend off the encroaching threat. As the pursuing forces closed in, the group dashed up the spiral staircase and burst into another corridor. Ron pointed ahead, shouting, the next stairwell's that way. Hermione suddenly realized she had lost sight of Draco. While sprinting down the hall, she craned her neck to glance back, relieved to see his polyjuiced figure trailing behind the others. But as they both quickened their pace, maneuvering to reach one another, a strange itch began to form in the back of her throat. On either side of her, Harry and Remus started to cough. What was happening? Suddenly, she felt something cold and small brush against her cheek, a fragment of gritty stone. In that fleeting moment, Hermione understood what was about to occur. She twisted back toward Draco, their eyes locking just 5 feet apart. Then, with a deafening roar, the ceiling collapsed directly above them, an arm wrapped around Hermione's waist, yanking her backward just in time. She heard Tonks yell, Reducto. And, with her eyes shut tight, she felt the shockwave that followed, a force that shattered the weight of the falling stone. Hermione hit the ground hard and tasted blood in her mouth. A ringing filled her ears. And voices swirled around her. Harry was shouting, Expecto Patronum. Stupefy, stupefy. When she opened her eyes, Lupin was at her side, scrambling to his feet as he aimed through the gaping hole in the ceiling. His impediment jinx struck one of the figures above, but another took its place almost instantly. Clouds of black dust billowed through the hallway, and rocks from the cave-in piled high around them. Coughing and blinking away tears, Hermione struggled to her feet, but panic surged within her as she realized she couldn't see the others. She couldn't find Draco. Terror flooded her senses. At her side, her silvery otter shimmered, ready to defend her. The light flickered and then went out completely. In that moment, all other thoughts vanished from Hermione's mind, leaving only one haunting question. Had he been hit? She had narrowly escaped death. He had been just feet away. Had Draco been struck? Hermione, come on. Tonks shouted, pulling her backward alongside Lupin. We've got to run. No. Hermione cried out, her voice raw and desperate. She struggled against their tight grip, consumed by the need to see the rock fall. She had to know that there wasn't a pale wrist protruding from the rubble, that there was no glimmer of blonde hair emerging as the polyjuice faded from his body. His body, the words echoed dreadfully in her mind. Draco's body, Draco's lifeless form. Limp and bleeding. A chill washed over her as Lupin and Tonks dragged her halfway down the hall. Another wave of Dementors poured in through the hole in the ceiling, their grotesque hands reaching out. With one last desperate glance into the dense cloud of dust and magical light, Hermione sprinted after Harry and Ron, tears stinging her eyes. When they finally escaped the Dementors, they found refuge in a cell on the ground floor. Hermione gasped for breath, her thoughts still racing. Draco. Even if he had survived the cave-in. She couldn't shake the image of the sweat on his brow, the feeble wisps of silver where his Patronus should have been. "We have the compass," Lupin's voice cut through her turmoil, snapping her back to reality. She looked up at him, but he was speaking to Tonks, who appeared just as terrified as Hermione felt. "The others know we have Hermione's compass," Lupin continued, striving to keep his tone steady. "That means your parents are aware we'll find the anchor, Tonks. They won't risk staying in these halls any longer than necessary." "Yeah," Ron added, still struggling to catch his breath. "Yeah, that's right, they'll probably head back to the yard to help." "The others," Hermione said, swallowing hard. There was some logic to it. Draco was with Tonks's parents and 3 others. They had the larger group, which meant they stood a better chance against the Dementors. Remus had pulled her to safety. Surely someone had done the same for Draco. She had to hold on to that belief. Tonks nodded, a hint of color returning to her pale cheeks. "All right, then the faster we get rid of the anchor, the quicker they can apparate out." "Exactly," Lupin agreed. "Go on, Hermione," Harry urged. Hermione pulled the compass from her pocket, relieved to find its face still intact. It took several long minutes to conjure their patron uses again, then, following the red needle, they raced into the depths of the building. But Hermione's mind was still on Draco, not on his face now, but on the way he had convulsed at the sight of the dark mark hovering above the battlements. She remembered how she had wanted to reach out and take his hand, realizing now that it might have been her last chance to do so. Meanwhile, Draco woke up in a cell, blood trickling down his forehead and a wand aimed at his nose. He instinctively reached for his own wand, but a gentle voice stopped him. "Easy, son. Just waking you up." As the wand lowered, Draco's eyes watered from the pain. He looked around the cell and saw half of their group standing there, a protective enchantment shielding the door. Dirk Cresswell from Goblin Liaison, whom his father had always despised, stood there, along with Augusta Longbottom and Oliver Wood, both scrutinizing him with narrowed eyes. Kneeling beside him were his Uncle Ted and Aunt Andromeda, their expressions unreadable. Draco felt the lump on his temple and realized his hair had returned to its natural state. He had been unconscious for too long to take polyjuice at the right time. Now he understood the glares from Augusta and Oliver, and the shock on his aunts' and uncles' faces, but he had no time for their surprise. Just before he was knocked out, the last thing Draco saw was Hermione, standing directly beneath the cave-in. "Hermione," he rasped, his voice hoarse from the rock dust. He struggled to sit up. "Where's Hermione? Is she all right? Is she safe?" His frantic question startled the others, and their initial dislike began to fade. Wood spoke up first. "I heard her voice after the cave-in," said the former Quidditch captain. "Someone must have pushed her out of the way." A wave of relief washed over Draco, and his muscles relaxed. He sagged back against the wall. "She was alive, all right," he managed, glancing around the dim cell. "Where are we? How do we find the others?" Augusta Longbottom sniffed haughtily. "We had to climb 2 more floors. This was the nearest place we found to hide and revive you." "We need to get back to the ground floor," added Dirk Cresswell urgently. "The others may have already used that compass to reach the anchor, or they could be under attack and need our help. If it seems like they've found the place, we'll head back out to the yard." Draco nodded, then staggered to his feet, his knees shaky. A steady hand gripped his shoulder, and after a moment of dizziness, his vision cleared. His uncle was there, holding him steady. "Are you still in pain, Draco?" Andromeda asked quietly. Her voice shocked him. It was as similar to his mother's as Bellatrix's was different. Andromeda had the same smooth, slippery intonation as Narcissa. Draco shook his head, momentarily lost for words. You may not know me, I'm Andromeda. My aunt. Yeah, I know, Draco rasped, his gaze drifting to Ted. Good. Good spot for a family reunion. Ted chuckled and released his shoulder, but Andromeda's smile was faint, her eyes scrutinized him with a cool interest. Draco recognized that look, he wore it himself when sizing someone up, for the first time. He and his aunt shared a striking resemblance, their faces echoing a familiar shape. Suddenly, curiosity surged within Draco like a roaring bonfire, reminiscent of the emotions he'd felt in the prison yard when he first laid eyes on her. Andromeda had made the same choices he had, decades ago. He wished he could freeze time, just to ask the questions that bombarded his mind. After her disinheritance, what had it felt like to be cast out? How had she endured it? He wondered where she and Ted Tonks had first crossed paths, Hogwarts, perhaps afterward. He realized he didn't even know what they did for a living. This knowledge had been kept from him his entire life. At that moment, Cresswell cursed from the door. I hear them down the hall. We need to get to the stairwell. Draco pulled the flagon of polyjuice from his pocket and took a swig. The familiar, unpleasant sensation of transformation washed over him. And he tucked the flagon away, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Despite the comforting glow of the other's patron uses exploring the cell, he still felt queasy from the oppressive cold of the dementors that lingered in the air. With every blink, he was transported back to Malfoy Manor. But the memories surfacing were no longer just about his own suffering under Voldemort's cruciatus curse. Instead, he saw himself receiving the dark mark, forcing laughter while a Muggle man was tortured and killed. That was another question he longed to pose to his aunt. Could those kinds of memories ever fade? But there was no time for contemplation. They dashed down the hallway, Cresswell leading them around one turn after another. Desperately searching for the stairwell, after a few minutes, they came to a stop in an empty stretch of corridor. No stairwell was in sight, only more rows of cells. No, Cresswell muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. It should be here, it was here. Wood glanced back the way they had come. We must have taken a wrong turn. There are other stairwells, Augusta whispered impatiently, we'll find another. No, Cresswell insisted, determination lacing his words. It has to be this one, Granger pointed when we said. Northwest. We won't be able to orient ourselves otherwise, but they had lingered too long, a voice echoed from 15 feet behind them. Look who we have here. Draco felt his stomach drop. He recognized the voice even before he turned around, wand at the ready. It was the snarling, sneering tone of Fenrir Greyback. Fenrir wasn't alone. Towering beside him were Thorfinn Rowell and Alistair Crabbe, all three so massive they seemed to fill the entire hall. Behind them, half a dozen ministry members loomed. For a split second, no one moved, then Ted shouted, "Run!" They dove down a side passage, abandoning any thoughts of finding their way. But Draco had bigger concerns than the Death Eater's pounding footsteps. The others were casting spells behind them to create walls, haze, and confusion, and with their focus elsewhere, their patron uses began to dim. Draco struggled to send hexes back at their pursuers, trying to ignore the cold tendrils of fear creeping into his chest. His aunt's Patronus glided alongside him, an elegant swan, with a mournful head and graceful neck. He focused on its movements, trying to find strength in its beauty. Draco had taught himself to conjure a Patronus the summer before his 6th year. Inspired by Potter's display during his practical OWL, Draco had wanted to prove to himself that he could do anything Potter could do. He practiced tirelessly through June. Then, in July, while focusing on the moment he was sorted into Slytherin, he had managed it. A glittering peacock burst forth from the tip of his wand, spreading its fan in his bedroom. He watched as it strutted along the rug, magnificent and emblematic of home, with a hint of menace in the way it moved. In moments of lazy pleasure throughout that month, he conjured the Patronus again and again. He even showed it to his mother, who smiled at the sight of the corporeal form a plan and escape. Draco pushed himself harder, shoving his hair back from his forehead as he ran. Just 2 weeks had passed since Voldemort declared Malfoy Manor the provisional headquarters for the Death Eaters. Since then, he hadn't seen the bird again. The compass needle spun wildly in Hermione's hand. "It's here," she gasped, clutching a stitch in her side. "We must be right above it now." They stood in a seemingly ordinary cell on the ground floor, caught in a mix of freezing temperatures and sweat after fending off several groups of Dementors on their way. As Harry, Ron, and Hermione scanned the room, Tonks and Lupin raised their wands, muttering charms under their breath. With a resonant click, a heavy iron ring appeared on one of the flagstones. Tonks flicked her wand, and the trapdoor creaked open. The five of them hurried down into the pitch-black cellar. "Lumos," Lupin whispered, casting a beam of light that illuminated the small room. The floor was a rough black sheet of rock, the cellar carved directly into the island itself. Hermione suspected they were below sea level. She moved around with the compass until it began to spin aimlessly again. "Here," she said, stopping, "right here." According to Suresh's calculations, the anchor should be about 2.5 meters below this spot. Tonks and Lupin motioned for her to step aside, took aim at the floor, and began to cut into the stone. Meanwhile, Draco dashed through the darkness, the sound of Fenrir's laughter echoing in his mind. "Stupefy!" he gasped, slashing his wand over his shoulder. He was at the front of the group. His wild jet of light barely hissed past Oliver Wood, who, with instincts honed by years of Quidditch, dodged effortlessly and retaliated with his own jinx. But the Death Eaters and Aurors rounding the corner deflected their spells. They zigzagged through the halls, hopelessly outnumbered. Their only chance was to evade capture and find a way out. They needed to stay far enough ahead to lose their pursuers in the maze-like corridors. "In here!" shouted Dirk Cresswell, and Draco understood just in time as he and the others dove into the cell after him. They pressed themselves against the wall, watching as Dementors, he counted at least a dozen, swooped down the hall toward the gathering of Death Eaters and Aurors. There were screams echoing through the air, but Cresswell urged, "Come on, we have to keep moving, find a stairwell." They dashed back into the corridor. Draco glanced over his shoulder, just in time to see Fenrir, Crabbe, and several Aurors break through the chaotic swarm of Dementors, silver vapor billowing from their wands, a mix of terror and fury etched on their faces. They turned a corner, and, there. Ted gasped, spotting a stairwell straight ahead, but as they rushed toward it, Draco's heart sank. He staggered against the wall, feeling the ominous rattling beneath them. The sound quickened. Dementors were lurking below, sensing their human prey above. "Up," Andromeda panted, "up." But when they reached the fifth-floor landing, Draco could sense even more Dementors nearby. He staggered back. Gripping the edge of a stone railing, his vision beginning to blur, now, he could hear voices rising from below. The Death Eaters had reached the stairwell too. He caught a glimpse of a cloak fluttering on the fifth floor. The chilling, hollow sucking sound filled the air. He closed his eyes, the harsh tones of laughter echoing in his ears, bouncing off the walls of Malfoy Manor. Suddenly, a hand clutched his. He opened his eyes to see Andromeda gripping him tightly. Draco clung to his aunt, gasping for breath. He needed to escape this place to ask her everything. She was the only family member who knew the truth, the only one he could trust not to abandon him. "Expecto Patronum," he whispered, his wand emitting only faint wisps of light, of silver. Cresswell gasped, uttering a single word, Scalatia. Draco and Andromeda stumbled as the spiral staircase began to spin, first slowly, then faster and faster, propelling them away from the Dementors lurking below. Shouts echoed from the depths, and Draco silently prayed that the spell had also dislodged the Death Eaters. They burst onto a higher floor, though Draco couldn't tell which one. He felt dizzy, yet his mind was clearer. There appeared to be fewer Dementors here. "Come on," Cresswell panted, waving them into the corridor. They sprinted ahead, hearts racing. "Another stairwell," Cresswell said. "We need to get back to the ground floor." Once we're there, but Draco would never discover Cresswell's plan. A jet of green light struck Cresswell in the shoulder. Mid-stride, he spun off his feet and collapsed, lifeless, in the corridor. Draco's fingers went numb as he and the others turned in shock. Fenrir, Raoul, Crabbe, and 3 other Ministry members emerged from the stairs. "You're next," Fenrir snarled. "If you don't, Bombarda," screamed Augusta Longbottom. The unexpected power of her spell sent a jolt through Draco, making the hair on his arm stand on end as it hurtled toward the Death Eaters. Raoul conjured a shield, and when Augusta's spell collided with it, an explosion of red-orange light erupted, causing everyone to flinch back. Then Draco realized that Augusta was running the wrong way. She charged toward the Death Eaters, and after a brief moment of hesitation, Oliver Wood sprinted after her, howling into the fray with his wand raised. "What are you doing?" Draco yelled, while Andromeda cried out, "Augusta, no. Find your daughter." Augusta shouted over her shoulder, deflecting a neon-orange curse into the wall, where it cracked the stone. Suddenly, a hand grasped Draco's wrist, anchoring him in place. Ted was dragging him and Andromeda down the corridor. "Come on," Ted gasped, blinking hard, his eyes glistening with tears. "Go." As they reached the corner, Draco shot a glance back. He saw Wood lying lifeless on the flagstones, his unseeing eyes staring blankly into nothingness. Then, he witnessed a jet of light strike Augusta Longbottom in the chest. She flew down the corridor like a rag doll, motionless. "Break, damn it!" Harry shouted through gritted teeth, slashing his wand at the ward anchor in desperation. A jet of light hit it, and, as it always did, the magic dispersed into a faint glow before evaporating. The ward anchor was a weathered stone sphere, about 2 feet in diameter, set upon a dark plinth. Ancient runes, carved centuries ago, whispered words of protection and stability. Hermione tasted blood in her mouth. She had bitten her lip too hard. All they needed to do was mar a single rune, and the entire enchantment would shatter. Yet, they hadn't even managed to create a hairline fracture in the stone. They had unleashed raw power against it, but it had been futile. Tonks had spent long minutes attempting a curse-breaking process she had learned during her aura training, but it had yielded no results. Lupin had tried spell after specialized spell as well. They even conjured physical tools to scrape against the anchor, but each time they approached, they encountered an invisible, rubbery surface that pushed them away. "What can we do?" Hermione said, hating how high and reedy her voice sounded. How childish it felt. The others. The 5 of them stood helpless, though Harry, Ron, Tonks, and Lupin were frozen in place. Hermione knew their hearts were racing as fast as hers. Was the second group still searching for the anchor? Had Draco and the others managed to return to the yard safely? "Maybe it's got something to do with the plinth," Tonks suggested in a shaky voice, kneeling beside the rectangle of stone. They all seized on the idea, kneeling down as well, and lifting their wands flickered to life, illuminating every inch of stone around them. "Here!" Ron shouted, his voice echoing in the dim corridor. "It's a rune, Hermione. What does it say?" Hermione scrambled to his side, leaning closer to the markings. "Erwim," she whispered, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Erwim. It means audible, or suddenly," she gasped and sprang to her feet. "I know what to do." Tonks and Lupin exchanged nods of encouragement, while Harry and Ron looked on, bewildered. Hermione leaned in, her voice steady as she began to read the runes aloud. Meanwhile, Draco dashed around another corner, his aunt and uncle close behind. The sight of Cresswell, Wood, and Longbottom, bodies strewn across the corridor like discarded debris, hit him like a punch to the gut. They were everywhere, slumped in every corner, sprawled across every flagstone. They had sacrificed everything, and for what? A fleeting 10-second lead? Footsteps echoed ominously behind them, and Draco felt the chill of dread creeping in. His grip on his wand was slipping, the darkness was closing in around them. Even as he ran, he knew they stood little chance. The only hope left rested with Hermione, somewhere deep within the confines of Azkaban, along with the others, determined to destroy the ward anchor. Suddenly, Draco gasped as he felt a clammy mist envelop him. He came to a halt between his aunt and uncle, the air thick with tension as a hoarse rattle echoed from the end of the corridor. "No," Ted moaned, panic creeping into his voice. Draco spun around, but the voices of the Death Eaters were growing louder. There was no way to retreat. They were trapped between two deadly forces. There. Andromeda gasped, her hand trembling violently as she pointed toward a side corridor ahead. They staggered forward, almost there. Almost. Crescio. A voice roared from behind them, followed by another shouting, Esclata. Both curses struck Ted, knocking him off his feet. No! Andromeda screamed, whirling around and unleashing a brilliant jet of white-gold light toward Thorfinn. Raoul collapsed, his body limp on the ground, mouth agape, spasms coursing through him. Confringo! Draco shouted, and the wall halfway down the corridor erupted in a shower of debris, forcing the other Death Eaters to halt in their tracks. Turning back, ready to flee, Draco's heart sank. Ted lay twitching on the floor, his face a sickly gray. The second curse had struck him in the thigh, leaving a deep, bloody wound. Ted! Andromeda gasped, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ted! Get up, enervate. But the charm intended to revive him only caused him to tremble more violently. Go, he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Andromeda, you have to go, get back to Dora. Draco. He tried to muster a smile. Just go. Draco glanced at his aunt, both of them assessing their chances. Had he managed to take down one of the Death Eaters? Could they stand and fight? But no, 4 figures were clawing their way out of the dust, and behind them, the chilling rattle of the Dementors grew louder. They would soon be trapped. Draco saw the anguish etched on Andromeda's face as she looked back at Ted, weakened by months in Azkaban. Her complexion was ashen. In a hushed, overlapping murmur, they both whispered, I love you, as Andromeda staggered back to her feet and seized Draco by the wrist. Sobbing, they ran toward the side corridor, casting spells over their shoulders. Draco thought he heard one of Andromeda's hexes connect, but he couldn't be certain. They turned into the side corridor and halted abruptly. Before them stood a stairwell, unlike the others. This one led up and out onto the battlements, where the wind howled through the night. Draco met his aunt's eyes, and in that moment, they both understood, this was it. They had seen the frenzied Dementors swirling outside. If they stepped onto the battlements, they were finished. Both of them were going to die here. Andromeda glanced back at him, her face mirroring his own yet streaked with tears that flowed freely. Draco found himself at a loss for words. All the questions that had plagued him earlier vanished, replaced by a heavy sense of despair. You chose the right path, Draco, his aunt whispered, her voice steady despite the chaos. We both did. Even if it ends here. He couldn't respond, he could only stand beside her, shoulder to shoulder, both raising their wands in defiance. Suddenly, Crab, Greyback, and a ministry wizard burst around the corner. A cacophony of shouts erupted as spells flew through the air. 2 collided with a deafening crack, sending a brilliant, blinding heat wave that made Draco stagger back. He braced himself for the searing pain he expected to come, perhaps even death itself. Then, the chaos settled. The ministry wizard lay motionless on the ground. Andromeda was slumped against the wall, her breathing shallow, her wand out of reach. A dark line marred her chest, her prison clothes soaked with blood. Crab and Greyback were still standing, triumph etched across their faces as they raised their wands, preparing to deliver the final blow. Just then, a cloak drifted into view, mere feet behind the Death Eaters. Draco let out a low moan and staggered back, his mind spinning with nausea, his vision fading to darkness. Crab and Greyback turned in unison, and Greyback let out a horrified shout. Crab didn't have time to react. The Dementor was already upon him, lowering its hood to reveal a grotesque sight that sent chills through Draco's veins. Beneath the hood, decayed, scabbed skin glistened ominously, skeletal fingers tightening around Crab's neck and face. Then, the Dementor pressed its gaping mouth over Crab's. Greyback's screams echoed through the air as he scrambled back, panic overtaking him as he fled down the corridor. The dark hall, pursued by a swarm of Dementors. In the chaotic spin of his thoughts, one raspy voice broke through, run. He turned to his right and saw Andromeda struggling to say, don't turn back. Then, her body slumped against the wall. She was gone. The Dementor released the lifeless form of Alistair Crabbe, his 6.5-foot frame collapsing to the ground, his eyes vacant and staring into nothingness. The Dementor lifted its head. Draco took off, racing up the steps, horror coursing through every fiber of his being. His wand gripped tightly in his hand, he burst onto the battlements and into the cold night air. The wind sliced through him, chilling him to the bone, and he found no trace of another wizard in sight. Only the cold stone beneath his feet and the ominous dark mark looming overhead. As he ran, a wild laugh erupted from his aching throat. He would die just as he was meant to last year, against the battlement, beneath the sign of Lord Voldemort. Behind him, the Dementor pursued relentlessly, and he could sense others gathering, drifting down from the night sky. He reached the edge of the battlement, nowhere left to run. Nowhere to hide, expecto. He croaked, sagging back against the wall. The Dementor that had consumed Crabbe's soul glided closer, its hood pulled low. Draco stared into the shadowy void beneath the cloak and whispered, expecto Patronum. A faint wisp of silver flickered from the tip of his wand. Draco's thoughts spiraled into an abyss of despair. If the anchor hadn't been destroyed yet, if the others hadn't found it. They must have fallen in their attempts. Hermione was dead, Potter was dead, the Order was shattered, his aunt and uncle were gone, taking with them his only chance at acceptance within his family. All his efforts had been in vain. He remembered standing on the astronomy tower. Gazing into the darkness, Dumbledore's face came to mind, a reminder that he could rely, one last time, on the wisdom of someone older and more experienced. That world, however, was gone. There was nothing left but the looming presence of the Dementor, slowing its approach. The terror radiating from Draco must have been a feast for it. His arms were draped over the battlements as he felt his lifeless wand slip from his fingers. The hawthorn wand, a gift from his parents when he was just 11, clicked once against the stone before tumbling into the abyss of night. He closed his eyes and waited, unwilling to witness the end. Desperately, he searched for a glimmer of solace, a wisp of silver to pierce the darkness, any happy memory. Hermione. He recalled the softness of her cheek, and for a moment, he imagined he could hear her voice, "Man as I was." Draco's eyes fluttered open. He couldn't help it, her voice felt so real, faint yet resolute, frightened but unyielding, Ophala Algiz. Her words began to swell, resonating over the battlements and echoing off the ancient stones of Azkaban, amplifying across the wards. In that moment, an image of her burst into his mind, bright and vivid, dispelling all else. He could see Hermione speaking the runes aloud, the furrow in her brow, the tremor in her lips. It struck him then, he had been wrong, she was alive. A fevered hope surged through him, and with it came a flood of memories. He remembered the sensation of her lips during their first kiss, sitting together at the table in headquarters, the way something delicate inside him had shattered, unleashing a torrent of warmth. He recalled laughing with her on Halloween, her fingertips grazing his cheek. He remembered the realization in a dingy muggle chip shop, knowing he would do anything to hold on to the world they could share. All these memories intertwined until Draco could see them clearly. He was deeply in love with her. Draco loved Hermione Granger more than anything else in the world, in a way he had never loved anyone or anything before. He cherished her, and even in his darkest moments, he couldn't let go. Memories flooded back to him, not just happy ones, but rich with hope and the promise of a new beginning. He could picture the surprise on Hagrid's face when he had offered his stiff apologies and bowed to Buckbeak. He remembered the Order listening to his suggestions at their meetings, their astonished expressions when he defended Hermione to his parents. He recalled shaking hands with Weasley, sharing laughter with Potter, and how Pansy had lied to protect him, even after learning he had fought for the Order. All of this held meaning. It was a promise of what could come next, if only he could survive to witness it. The Dementor raised its hands to its hood, while others spilled down like ink from a starry sky. Blotting out all light, Draco plunged his hand deep into the folds of his robe and felt Hermione's bag. As his fingers closed around the beaded exterior, a wave of love surged through him for her brilliance, her foresight. He yanked the bag free and dove his hand inside. His fingers brushed against the handle of the Elder Wand. Again, that warmth surged within him, that feeling of rightness. The wand hummed in his grip like a living creature. He pulled it out, and just as the Dementor began to lower its hood, he shouted, Hermione's face a vivid memory in his mind, expecto patronum. He braced himself for the peacock to emerge, to fan its brilliant feathers in a protective shield, to burst forth and drive the Dementors away while Hermione's voice echoed in the air around him. But the silver creature that erupted from his wand was not a bird, or was it? It seemed to have wings. The creature charged at the Dementors, keeping them at bay. As it cantered around, battling wave after wave of the dark creatures, Draco, nearly delirious, finally saw it for what it truly was. It landed gracefully on 4 powerful hooves, its magnificent wings beating against the air, driving the Dementors away. With a proud yet delicate stance, it raised its sleek head high, embodying the essence of both strength and sensitivity. It was a hippogriff, a remarkable blend of 2 beings into one. As Hermione's voice soared to a crescendo, reaching its peak, the final syllable burst forth, unleashing a crack like a whip that could have echoed across the land, the wards shattering at her command. Then came the sounds of disapparition reverberating throughout the prison, a symphony of escape rising from the yard and echoing through the distant hallways. Each crack built upon the last, creating a rhythm reminiscent of cleansing rain. With that, Draco turned on his heel, leaving Azkaban behind him.